Hi, I'm Peter R. Bregan, MD, and I am a psychiatrist. And the subject today is medication spellbinding. It's presentation number 3 in my series about simple truths about psychiatry. Now, the first presentation I made was about biochemical imbalances, debunking this idea that people have biochemical imbalances in their brains when they go to see a physician when they have anxiety, depression, or even bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. There's just no evidence for that. But ironically, and this is one of the great ironies of modern life, you're guaranteed to get a biochemical imbalance with a psychiatric drug because if it's working, it's disrupting your biochemistry. It's the only way the drugs can work. And my second presentation was more about how the drugs work, how they disable the brain, how they cause apathy and indifference, which feels like an emotional anesthesia, or how they cause sedation, which slows you down and reduces all your higher functions, including things like anxiety, or how, more dangerously even, they can cause euphoria, making you feel better than ever, when in fact, you may be doing worse than ever. That brings me into the subject of medication spellbinding. I've written scientific papers about this, and you'll find a chapter about it in my new book, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. Medication spellbinding is an important concept, and I'm hoping that more and more professionals and just ordinary folks are going to begin to grasp this. Because it's been an age-old question. Why do people take substances that are obviously harming them and indeed not doing them any good in the process? I was giving a lecture at a law school one day down in Washington, D.C., and I was talking about how drugs work by harming the brain. And when I finished up, a young man came charging down the aisle. I mean, he was coming down so fast, I thought, he might get very, very aggressive with me. And he stopped at the podium and he stared at me and he said, "You are so wrong about drugs. I couldn't have gotten through law school without cocaine." And he turned around and left. Well, people do feel they can't get through life without alcohol, without marijuana, without cocaine, and without Prozac, and without Effexor, and without Abilify, and without lithium. They're all psychoactive substances. There's no magic in the fact you got it from a prescription. They have the characteristics of psychoactive substances. And we know for sure that people will take psychoactive substances while the quality of their lives deteriorates, all the while feeling they need more. And it's not just cigarettes, and it's not just alcohol, and it's not just marijuana. It's all the psychiatric drugs. One of the saddest things I have to deal with is giving a talk or giving a class, and some really sweet human being comes up to me and tells me how much they need their psychiatric drug. And they look so sad, and they look lifeless, they look injured, and yet they're feeling that somehow they're better because of their psychiatric drug. Sometimes this is made really graphic. You'll see a video of a child aged 5 or 6 before they're put on Ritalin and then on some other psychiatric drugs. And then you see the later video and you see the vacancy in the eyes, or you see the smiles not there. Or the parents, if you interview them, will finally realize that when he was 5, he was like the spark plug of the family. Now he's sitting there more like a fire hydrant. It's really sad. It's really, really sad. Well, the first principle of medication spellbinding is that all psychoactive substances tend to prevent an individual from realizing their harmful effects. The psychoactive substances, by diminishing our capacity, by impairing our frontal lobes, prevent us from appreciating their harmful effects. That's why somebody can feel like they can drive better than ever, and you know if they get in the car, they're likely to kill themselves or someone else. Psychoactive substances impair our judgment about their effects on us. That's one of the major reasons that the drug companies and the medical profession get away with flooding our country with these medical psychoactive substances. Because when you're on them, you don't appreciate their harmful effects. Another characteristic of the drugs is that if you do begin to become upset or disturbed on a drug, let's say you're taking Xanax or you're taking an antidepressant, you start to get irritable and angry and you yell at your family, you're not likely to think it's the drug. You're likely to think it's my wife or my husband or the kids or the boss or the job. You won't get straight that you've been changed by the drug. Now think of a simple comparison. There are people who drink alcohol and come home and are certain that their wives and kids need to be beaten up. Certain they're the cause of all their angst. But that same person goes to AA, is clean and sober, and may go 20 years without ever being like that again. Now that's a combination of not being on the drug and learning new principles of living. But absent the drug, the individual isn't doing these things. So first, we don't recognize the adverse effects, and if we get a distressed effect, we tend to blame it on something else. Very often what patients do, because they've been taught this by the medical profession, is they blame it on their mental illness. So you're taking your antidepressant, and it makes you more depressed. You're not aware there's a big warning in every label for antidepressants, every official FDA-approved statement about the drug, which is you may think of as the package insert, it's called the label, that every one warns several places about worsening of condition on antidepressants. You don't know that. You haven't been told that probably by a doc. So your condition starts to worsen on the drug, and you are very unlikely to attribute it to the drug. And you're going to accept your doctor's opinion that you just need to stay on it, hasn't taken effect yet, you're just feeling worse because of your biochemical imbalance, when the only biochemical imbalance you've got is the one he gave you. Another characteristic of medication spellbinding, and this applies to all psychoactive substances, is that you might think you're feeling better than ever when you're doing worse than ever. And this is common. This is really common. It's related somewhat to the feeling of euphoria, which is one gets from cocaine or amphetamine and can often also get from the antidepressants and the stimulants routinely used in treating children, sometimes adults. And that sense of feeling better than ever is, as I mentioned in one of my earlier reports, one of the most dangerous places you can get. In my forensic work, my medical legal work, I have patients who have been high on antidepressants for a year, during which time they've embezzled and stolen and put the money in their own bank account. One person I'm thinking of put it in his own joint bank account with his wife, told people he'd inherited money, told the person responsible for doing the annual audit of his company that he'd gotten rich, and then put online the very data that when he taught the rest of the staff how to use the data, immediately showed he'd been stealing, writing checks to himself. This person thought he was doing better than ever. Incidentally, it's interesting, some of his friends thought, is he on cocaine? Well, he was on psychiatric cocaine. He was high on an antidepressant. Another story, and I tell these stories in my book, Medication Madness. Another story is of a physician who started to think it would be fun to play with machinery. I mean, what guy doesn't want to play with machinery? One day his wife looked out the window at 2 in the morning and there was an oil truck sitting in his driveway. Eventually he had his house surrounded out in the country, but in plain view, with tow trucks and huge trailers and all kinds of equipment that he was gathering and never did anything with and never tried to sell. And he was finally caught when he was using his sports car to pull a multiple-ton piece of equipment through his little town, and it all fell over. This is medication spellbinding in the form of mania induced, in this man's case, by stimulant drugs, including Strattera, which is supposed to be the non-stimulant stimulant used to treat ADHD. Well, a fourth characteristic of medication spellbinding is that in rare cases, and I've just been describing one, unusual cases, not necessarily rare, but unusual, people will do things that their ethics and morality would never have allowed them to do. I've been in cases where people commit violent murders out of the blue, without provocation, against innocent people because they've been driven out of their minds by an inner agitation caused by Paxil or Zoloft. Or they've been disinhibited by taking Xanax, the benzo, which loosens your inhibitions. So this is medication spellbinding. This is nothing that would help us more understand what's going on in our country than to know that the fact that people take psychiatric drugs means no more about their usefulness than the fact people are smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol in excess. All psychoactive substances impair our ability to understand the dysfunctions produced by the drugs. And there are better ways. I talk about the better ways in some of my books, and as we move along in these simple truths about psychiatry, I'll be talking directly to you about the better ways.